Shall we say the pledge? Oh, sorry. Do we start before the pledge? I don't remember.
It's meant to, well,
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I talked to Andy about how we would begin the meeting, and we talked about him just kind of very briefly going over the results of our questionnaire and kind of putting it in context for anyone who might choose to watch. And I thought for the summer I would kind of go out of order, but yeah, Jane's technically correct that I'm. All right. Anyone want to make a move on the agenda?
Move to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That said, do we have anything else? Any emergency modification? I should have asked that ahead of time. I'm totally out of practice with this. So I talked to Andy, and he's going to give, if you guys are in agreement, a brief overview of this questionnaire that we all took, and then we can just kind of go at it and just talk. I thought it made sense, given the kind of potentially open-endedness of this, to give ourselves a hard 7 o'clock out. Just we're going to commit. We're going to be done by 7. If it takes longer than that, it's shorter than that, fine. But I think 7 hour and a half of this discussion should be enough, and it also give us a sense of they can't just let it go endlessly. If you're all in agreement.
That sounds good.
So go ahead, Andy.
Sure. So, as Kevin said, this is going to be an overview for you, although I know you guys are aware of this information, so it's probably primarily for you and for anyone who may be watching from home. So, last week we did have CSBA, the California School Board Association, send out an email to each of you to complete a 58-question survey. The survey organized the questions in 2 overarching categories: conditions for effective governance, which ended up then having some subcategories that ended up totaling 47 questions. And then that final page, you'll notice, is actually a separate category of, the last 2 pages, the 36 to 58, are board responsibilities. So the idea was this was anonymous. We still don't know actually who answered in any particular way. Certainly none of the board members are aware of how one another individually answered, but we did receive a report last night. It was added to our agenda materials last night before our 24-hour deadline for the Brown Act. So this is available online as well as in the back. Only thing I'm going to point out as far as the scoring, obviously they've given us a nice little color coding in the, I suppose it's a battery that has varying levels of fullness. If you, again, I know you guys saw, but on the page 2, it actually explains what the different color codings represent. Important to note, the green is for if everyone, all 5 board members, answered either almost always or often. Green is that if any of you answered less often or rarely for a question, that automatically bumped it into the blue. So something where 4 of you may have answered almost always and 1 person answered less often, it's going to look like a lower color code or lower battery fill than if all 4 of you had actually or all 5 of you had said often. So it can be a little confusing when you see that. That's actually the way that it's scored is based on either all of you being in that almost always often, the majority of you being in that almost always often, and then as you see that the yellow is if a majority of the board members rated these items as less often or rarely, and then the red is if all of you actually rated it in one of those last 2 categories. So just want to make sure we all were on the same page as far as the way the color coding arrives. I'm not going to go through any of the individual questions. That's really what we wanted to open up the conversation for, but just want to give that background as far as the general headings and the way that we arrived at these results. So this is the survey results for all 5 of you.
So I thought a good way to start might be just for each of us to talk about things that kind of came to our minds as we went through the questionnaire. And if anyone would like to start, go for it. If not, I can start.
I'll start.
Okay.
One of the things that struck me, there were a couple of questions about it, but it was relative to the concept of are we focusing on the things that are most important? And I thought that was a really interesting question, because often our focus is driven by state requirements or policy requirements or things that come up, and all of those things have to be done. But, you know, and not saying that we're not focused on important things, but it seemed to me that that's something that we could more consciously think about. The other thing that came to me is, you know, I've seen on YouTube some really terrible boards. So overall, I couldn't judge us too harshly because I like
Because I
all of
haven't
you.
thrown a water bottle.
And throwing members of the community out in handcuffs and things, which we have never done once.
And don't intend.
Rarely put that down as
Rarely. I mean, there are a lot of further things I'll say, but I think that was kind of the big picture thing that came to me was, not that we're not focusing on the things that are important, but are we really conscious of how we spend most of our time?
And so does that include having concrete goals that we are working towards? Is that what you mean by that?
I don't know if that means goals or things that we think are important. Not necessarily with a goal in mind, but focusing our thought and energy on the things that the district needs.
I was hit by, you know, going through it, how pleased I was that I felt a lot of times that it was almost always, and that was a good feeling, feeling that this is a good board. And I thought it might be interesting to, well, I did two things. When I took it by myself, I was thinking, these are 2 or 3 things I would like to talk about when we get together. But then when I received last night the results, I started marking, well, these are the things we actually disagree on. Like, there's like a 1 and a 2 and a 2 and a 1. So maybe we should talk about those things. So I don't know. That's just my first observation. So there's a few that seem really important to me, but then there's others that we didn't agree on, and it might be important to touch base on them.
I have to say, I felt exactly the same way going through this. I was very pleased to be able to say it's a cohesive board, it's an effective board. I think our ethics are high, our openness and transparency to the public has been really, really good. I'm very proud of us. When we got to the objective stuff, that's where I started sort of stumbling, and I wasn't surprised actually when the results came through, like measurable indicators to assess district performance, right? We talked about that. We struggled with what would those be. And I agree with Thane. The other thing in terms of, other than just the daily business, right, which can get really absorbing, what are our specific things that we're pushing for or monitoring, or because it doesn't have to be, we're going to build an athletic center or an aquatic center, yay, right? It could just be, we're going to monitor bullying reports, or we're going to monitor something, right? I'm just pulling stuff. Again, signal things that would indicate before we get smarter balance, kind of what's happening out there. Yeah, so that's kind of where and I was pleased. I think that's kind of what I see here, really.
Well, I kind of thought, one thing I thought was I was not necessarily in agreement that the things that CSBA thinks we should agree on necessarily are, things we should agree on, or it's not so much agreeing on, it's just that that a almost always is not, in my view, always the right answer. For example, I feel like in a small district, as constrained as we are, resource-wise, we don't have a lot of intermediaries to interact with, although we can certainly talk to Cheryl, and that's about the extent of intermediaries before we get to Andy. I think I overall feel like we appropriately individually engage with Andy, and I don't think so. If it's someone said, well, the board does only interacts with the superintendent as a board, I'd say I'm glad we don't, because if we did, it would mean the only time we did it were at Brown Act appropriate board meetings, and that's just not enough. I mean, he needs to know where each of us sometimes are coming from on subjects, and I think it's also a measure of our engagement. You know, we're not people that just show up at a meeting, and that's the only time we think about these issues. We'll pick up the phone and call Andy and say, hey, you know, did you see this? Did you see that? So that was one of the things that struck me. And then the other thing that struck me, well, then what struck me was on the subject of advocacy in the community. I thought maybe that is something that we should sort of somehow formally add to our plate. You know, I don't think right now we as a board. It was interesting when Shelley, I think, was the one who suggested that we formally address the Airbnb thing. And I'd been out there addressing it as an individual, never occurring to me that that this should be something that maybe we should do as a board. So it feels to me like maybe we should be more, you know, formal about like, hey, there's a lobbying, you know, there's going to be lobbying up in Sacramento. Do any of us want to go? There's going to be something before the Ventura Planning Commission. Should we engage it? You know, it does feel like we should more formally do that. And then the last thing that struck me is that, you know, as I contemplate whether even at this late day to run for the board again, is just the, you know, that thing that we say as parents or as at work or whatever we're doing where we have sort of grand ideas and like life is what happens when you're making other plans. You know, it's like here I am 4 years in and it's like, what have I
What
changed?
are your accomplishments?
Right. What have I done from a vision perspective in this position? And you know, I think one of the answers is I'm not sure. Well, heresy. I'll say I'm not sure vision is what, you know, makes great education. I think what makes great education is I personally think it's often happening very individually between the teacher and students, and it's a very local kind of phenomenon, number one. But number two, I feel like the board job, you know, unfortunately does consist of a lot of oversight that doesn't involve visioning. And finally, to the extent that we're doing a lot of what feels like make work, I think to all of us, like the LCAP and things like that, unfortunately, I don't think it amounts to visioning. I mean, I think it feels to me on the same level as organizations I've been part of where we spend hours trying to come up with a vision statement, you know, wordsmithing. Do we want, you know, robust? Is it robust? Are we active, fully
Dynamic.
integrated?
Not dynamic.
And I don't think these things ever, I'm not sure that they ever become anything. I'm not sure it ever goes anywhere. I'm not sure how it becomes a reality in a student's life, which I guess is what I would want to think, is that I, as a school board member, made decisions, did things that, had I not been there, the school district would have not been as effective, the kid wouldn't have had as good an education, wouldn't have had the opportunities that they did have. And that's hard.
Yeah, the margins of change are very narrow, right?
Right.
You're not going to come in here and in 4 years revolutionize the district.
Well,
We know.
You learn that quickly. You learn that so quickly.
So, and that's why, I mean, I go back to the same thing about, you know, we should pick some things, but not everything, because we can't do everything.
Right.
And I'm not sure what I can do. I'm not an instructor. You know, I'm not a pedagogical expert. I can support and encourage creativity among the instruction staff and everybody else. You know what I mean? And I can look at it. I can look at it every meeting and let people know that I am.
Right.
I'm not sure how much more we as a body can do.
I think that's actually why I'm running again, is because I hope that we can move the board in that direction about one or two things. You can't, I mean, I think we discussed once at one of these meetings, you know, how many times are we, you know, oh, hey, you know, this idea really interests me. oh, Andy, this idea really, you know, we're all handing Andy these ideas, and where, do we want him to focus on that? Or do we want him to focus on what he needs, or what Cheryl thinks he needs, or what the principals think he needs? So it's very difficult. But if we say, look, we've been looking at our district for 4 years, and it hits me that we need a change in, you know, I talked to Cheryl, for me, one of the things was K through 2 reading and a more flexible day. Not in terms of time of day, but, you know, the structure is it's too structured for K, which, you know, maybe that becomes our thing. Or maybe as a board, we say, you know, math, whatever. I think we need to say to the two of them, this is a problem in this district, and it's important. We want to focus on that issue. I think we can do that. I think, and maybe that would actually help, because we would stay away from kind of tossing these one-outers, because we know that we've asked them to focus on these 1 or 2 things. And, you know, and have them come back and say, you know, we're struggling with that because, you know, well, here's the reasons why we're not successful, or here's what we're hoping to change to make it more successful. I don't know.
I agree with that. I mean, I agree with that, and that's a really interesting idea. Is I think one thing is that the board has not, in my experience, really been a driver particularly before. I think it would be really exciting to imagine us as a board having some, and I agree, it's got to be limited. You know, it can't be everything, but something that we say, this will, if we can pull this off, this thing that we all agree on will make us a better school district, and then be the driver. Because we often, you know, we're just like we blow through the halls, you know, hey, you know, how's that thing going, you know, get on it, see you later, you know, I'm getting back on my plane, you know. So to be a driver, that word comes up a lot, but to be a driver is different, and it's a little different role for the board. I thought when I first got on the board that I would be more of a driver, but I very quickly learned that, you know, that my hands would be mostly full being a overseer, a approver, a person listening to a presentation that by law has to be made, and then asking good questions hopefully, but still, you know, so like something discrete, specific, saying, here's what we think we can do as a district to increase the quality of our reading education. It's, you know, this is a pedagogical idea that's out there. We want to implement it. Let's help make that happen.
Right.
It's not easy, you know. I mean, it's your job, Andy, is, you know, I can only imagine. It's like 1 second you're, you know, you're learning about a lawsuit. You're dealing with a recalcitrant teacher. You're looking at the budget. You know, you'd have to be. It's so difficult, I think, to be a driver of sort of broad change. You know.
And we're small enough of district, I'm sorry to speak again, but, you know, our new teacher union agreement says, you know, the teachers want a bigger say in what's happening on their campuses. So how do you reconcile that, right? What you know, we pick whatever we're gonna pick, and the teachers, are we gonna pull them along? Are we gonna ask them to pull them along? Are they gonna how do you get buy-in? You know, maybe, I mean, when you had that 6th grade meeting, that, remember about years ago, that was a real, I mean, there was a lot of parents here, a lot of faculty. That's an inspiration, but you can't always get, you know.
But that also reminds me that it's a slow-moving ship, because I think that groundwork helped what we finally did. How many years later? It took a long time to get that to happen, and that wasn't for naught. What we, you know, that
At least 5 years ago.
yeah, it took a while. It may not happen in the 4 years.
No, that's true.
One person is on the
Part of
board.
it is identifying it though, like what Jane is saying. I mean, because we have done some things, right? This whole thing about moving 6th grade. we've talked about reinventing our middle school. That is a huge thing.
But
And
no,
I
we-
want to see it. I want to see it happen. I want you to be coming in with ideas about what people are visioning for the new Matilla Hub. That is an opportunity, again, to add uniqueness to our curriculum, to reinvigorate the instructors. If you make it interesting, they'll come. But we didn't really, I mean, we said, do good things, go and forth and prosper, right? You know, live long and whatever, but it's not a standing agenda item. We haven't talked about it again since. And there are other things. That's just one thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's picking it and saying this is what we're going to monitor. I think we can do it because I think we have done some things. That's the only one that comes to mind right now.
We have, no, we have. I think, I agree too. I think I think transparency has been a huge part of this
Yes.
board. I think this board
Yes.
has constantly been vigilant to crack it open, let the sun shine in.
So one of the things that comes to my mind in regards to a thing is not actually pedagogical at all, but the racial divide that we have in our schools and in this town. And I think the schools are the appropriate place to change that. And I see I'm not sure exactly how that's done, but that's one of my concerns in the district. And you know, when we had the incident with the baseball players, and after that there was all the discussion, the English classes, I believe it was all the English classes at Nordhoff, had these conversations on the topic. And I talked to a lot of the kids afterwards, and the kids who were all in the upper division classes said, that was a waste of time. We all agree, we all are on the same page. This should never have happened. It's not a non-starter issue. And all the kids who are in the lower classes, the gen ed classes or the remedial classes, were very segregated in their views and said it was too contentious. There was no way to even broach the conversation. Nobody could hear each other. It didn't sway anybody at all. And so what I saw from that was we have a lot of division here. There isn't a place for these conversations, and I think it's getting more and more fractured. As we saw in those letters to the board from the English class, from Ms. Dvorak's class, and a couple of the kids said, you know, why is it that we can't wear this, but they can wear that? And there were some of those issues brought up. And I believe, does anybody know that there's actually a bill that has been passed or is before Congress in the state of California that, I'm not sure if I'm going to get it right, either mandates or allows, I'm not sure which, Chicano studies and Native American studies and African American studies and different types of classes. Does anybody know about that? No, and I think it's coming down the pipe for 2020.
In high school?
In
These
high school.
classes?
Mhm.
You do bring up an interesting thing. It's a cultural thing we struggle with at work too, the whole diversity concept of getting away from all the old ideas and into just an appreciation of differences, not anybody's more special than anybody else, but just that the differences themselves are valuable.
Mhm.
And that's difficult. It's disappointing if it's a problem here. But that's
Well,
another
you
good
know,
example.
and this is sort of where I think we get back to what I think are the delicate subjects as to the interrelationship between us and administration. Because I think I share where you're coming from, Shelley, and yet I also feel that tension of like where does it become the board sort of bigfooting into a subject, you know, kind of well, one, you don't want to sell out your administration. You don't want to be like,
Right.
you guys aren't handling this right. We're gonna get involved here, as if to begin with, that we would have the magic, which of course we don't. We're well-meaning. Yeah. But that I think is, I think that's actually one of the hardest things about being a board member is staying in your lane. And so I don't know, if this is a staying in your lane subject, but I kind of feel like it is a little bit because I think as a school board, if we, on a racial subject, if we identified what we thought was a deficiency in the district, of course, we're obligated to address it. On the other hand, if as a school board we feel like the administration is addressing it, but maybe not exactly the way I personally would address it, then it gets more complicated. Then the other subject is, does the school board, is this one of the big vision things where we as a school board say we want to engage the subject of the racial divide in OI and proactively and constructively, not retrospectively and punitively, come up with ideas for how, here's some things that we think we could do as a district.
Some of it is how you frame it, obviously, right? So dealing with the racial divide is probably not how we would approach it because it sort of assumes a lot of stuff, right? And it's more, I think as a board member, my biggest tool is my attention, right? Because I don't have all the answers, but if I start looking at stuff, then you guys have to notice that we're looking at it and try and do something. And to me, what you're talking about is a culture, is a school culture issue. Do our students feel safe? Do they feel respected? Do they feel, we have that test that they go through, right? And so rather than focusing on one particular area, what you're really saying is that our campuses should be welcoming to everyone, and they should be respectful of everyone. And I do think that's a standard that this board can set and can encourage you guys to continue, because I know you're doing it now. It's not like you're not doing anything. But this is about what are we consciously following and looking at and giving attention to. I think it could be framed in such a way that it is sort of our bailiwick in the sense of, as community reps, we want our schools to be safe and welcoming and respectful for our kids because they will learn better. It's just like bullying, right? I do think, I'm not going to tell Janine how to handle it because I don't know. But I'm going to say, please handle it, right? And let me know how it's going and let me know what we can do to support you in that. I don't know what we would pick, but I think everything that people have mentioned are all potential things as long as we stay out of the weeds, right? Because I agree with you, it's not for us to tell people how to do stuff. We weren't elected because of that. Andy has the job, so if we set a challenge, staff has to sort of figure out what can be done with the resources that we have and then get back to us and let us know.
So I think that that's sort of an advantage and a disadvantage of this board, is that we are generally doers. And to come to this where you're really not allowed to do, like, the only thing I could say that we could say was the school advisory board. That's ours to do, at Nordoff.
You better get reelected, by the way.
Oh, I can serve through December. I think you can certainly encourage, just by having people talk about things. Like, I would say to some of that, I would say, well, our schools are already doing that. I mean, this doesn't mean that students are not feeling a divide or a separation, but I don't think there's something our schools are doing to cause that separation, right? So to be specific, that letter you were talking about from one of the students was saying that they're not allowed to wear bandanas because it's a gang sign. But I can't remember what the other side was wearing,
It
shirts.
was red MAGA hats.
Right, so certain, they are allowed to make a statement with some things, but you're not allowed to make a statement with something if it's considered gang-related. So I would say if we were going to try to address something, we would, it's bringing that, I think the student advisory board is a great way, it's like, come talk to that board. Come talk to your students who are gonna meet with a board member, and a board member's gonna come back and say, here's what the kids are feeling. And it's not necessarily that Andy needs to get something on Shirley, it's just at the next time the leadership meets, or, did you hear that people are talking? And sometimes just by talking about it, like the whole registering for food, for the lunch program, just by talking about it, you raise people's awareness of the issue. And then people start participating in things or making changes that happen without us officially having a program or doing something. It's about raising awareness, and that's interesting. One of our yellow things was that we're not, the board advocates on behalf of students in public education at the local level. It's like, and we're all feeling we don't do that. And how do we do that? That might be a little
Well, and I
more-
think it also goes with the measurable indicators.
Right.
So some of these issues or things we bring up, once you look at something and start measuring it and create that awareness like you were talking about in the talk, it does change and improve because we're paying attention to it simply. It's not going unaware.
I think on the things that can make a difference, it's hard, it would be hard for us to be successful if we think it's a good idea and nobody else does. And so that means that whatever we pick would have to be something that everybody else wants to do, and maybe they're doing it already. But I think that there are probably some things, there usually always are, that people want to do, but they kind of feel uncomfortable. And I think as a board, we can provide support to make staff, to make everybody feel like, yeah, I'm gonna get support if I do whatever. It could be a subject matter that maybe we don't feel like we're doing well enough in, and we can shine the light and say, hey, let's, we're here to support you. What can we do to help you with that? And focus a little more resources to that area if it needs it. Because that's something we can do.
Parents, a lot of, if you visit, it's like you were saying, individual classrooms, the one-on-one, or where you go to a school, and, and that's the thing that bothers me when I hear families coming from, totally, they don't know anything about Ojai, and they immediately go to private schools. I'm like, wow, if you would just visit that school, you would be blown away. Now, you're looking at probably test scores, which aren't reflective of the school as a whole. So how do you change the perception out there, but how do you help parents? So if, just to go back to the reading thing, if the problem is reading, right, all the studies show you gotta get parents reading at home. So how do we help promote that? How do we get that information out there? That might be, without specific, we have a new program, though I would like to see a new program in the K through 2. We can certainly help bring light to that just by writing the paper, getting a letter and having people start talking about it.
But and to follow on that, there are a lot of good ideas that aren't controversial. Not that we couldn't pick something controversial, but I think not having a racial divide isn't that controversial. Maybe there are a couple of people that we want a racial divide, but there aren't that many people who feel that way, I don't think. And so maybe that's a thing. Or maybe it's, I think it was mentioned before, we want to do better in math. I don't think anybody's saying, we're doing too good in math right now. And so, it's things that, I think we have two tools that nobody else has. One is setting policy, and two is directing resources. Well, you have that to some extent, but we do too. And so I think if there are things that we can do, one of those two things to foster, we can make a difference. If it's just talk, anybody can talk. Although, we'd like to think our talk and all the people who are watching at home will get inspired and go out and do something. But I think the policies and the resources, if we can find areas where we can do that.
I have a couple thoughts. One is kind of playing the part of Thane and backtracking a little bit. I also think there's a dance somewhat between the school board and the administration, and I will say kudos to Andy and Cheryl in that I think it's important. I personally could not serve on a school board in a culture where the administration was brittle and had the tendency to feel attacked, etc. I appreciate that you guys, you don't, for lack, I don't have a good word for it. You don't take it the wrong way, to put it in teenage terms. You understand that we in our position, and we're all in different positions in the community. We have different insights. But I like the ability to go to an administrator and not feel like the administrator is going to see this as an indictment of them or indictment of what they've done. That they can say, they can understand, that we don't have to every time preface it and say, you're doing a great job, this is not anything about you, but I like that. And then I had a thought about the racial divide, which is a little different than your take on that thing, which is that I think there is some room. I think you're right. Abstractly, there's no person that would not be in favor of diminishing the racial divide. But I will say that we see over and over again in our metrics of various types that there is a real, I'm not going to say caste system, but there almost is in our district where our Mexican American population just does not engage the district consistently the way the other groups do. And I would love to if we, talking about visioning, I would love to tackle that somehow. We've talked about it in the reduced lunch area, and we've done a good job of harvesting more people for that, which is great. But I still feel like there must be a perception out there of people that just don't feel comfortable engaging with the school district. And we've talked about whether some of that could have to do with the current political environment.
Right.
But I would just love to do something proactive that we could measure it in years forward and go, look how much better we're doing now. Look how much more comfortable people are. Look how people recognize this is their district as much as anyone else's.
And I would add to that it doesn't even have to come this high, that engagement with teachers and principals at the school level would be beneficial.
I'm agreeing with that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying we see, when Javier comes in lately and says, here's my latest COPA meeting stats, and it's been pretty poor. And back to school. There are lots of areas where you just can tell. I go to back to school, you can just tell there's just not as much representation.
Right.
And I know, we all know these people. They're fabulous people, great family people, hardworking people that somehow don't really feel like this is theirs, and they should. I'll throw out there, we haven't talked much. It used to be very much because what's her name? Belchi, the special ed.
Mm-hmm.
She was consistently at our board meetings back in the day when her kid was in school, and we don't deal with special ed very often. It's just a fact.
Yeah, we used to talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
this number 39, the board adopts clear and measurable indicators to assess district performance that we scored so low on. And I know several of us have voiced the opinion that test scores only mean so much, but we don't have anything else tangible that we assess, that we look at. And I'm wondering if there is something that we would like to adopt as a board, that we do assess on a regular basis, that we're looking at, that we could then also put on school websites as part of the assessment, so when people are coming here and they look at test scores, right next to it is other indicators that we are measuring that may look different than test scores and be more attractive. I'm not sure what those are. I've been racking my brain on that question, but
I mean, just surveys of how happy the kids are, how
The chick survey?
that, yeah.
Yeah, California Healthy Kids Survey. We do that every 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, if our kids are higher than average in terms of being comfortable here and feeling respected, and our ratios are such that they get to know their instructors and something more than in a bigger school, that's a big deal.
right.
I mean, if.
Well, and I don't even think we just need to look at the ones that are better than most. I think we need to pick indicators that really help us have a pulse on what's going on, because I don't feel like test scores necessarily give us the whole picture.
They don't measure everything, no?
Yeah,
They
I
don't
have to,
measure a lot
yeah, I
of
agree with that.
things.
I have to say, Jane, I feel like you do a pretty good job of having context. You do a better job of having a historical perspective on some of the stuff. So periodically, you'll go like, well, I noticed that we did, that, and I remember 2 years ago, but it's hard for me not to see these abstractions and just be like, I don't know what to do with it. And I would be really interested in the board considering developing our own. I think it would also really distinguish us as a school district if we were to try and develop some metric, or series of metrics that we use that we think are actually, cohort or the kid specific, because of course, like in any sport or anything else, improvement is the name of the game, right? It's not how good you are abstractly in the complete sense. It's how much better are you than you were. And I'm not sure that our current metrics do a great job of that. At least I know that the publicized stuff is just where are we relative to the state, how did we do, what percentage. It doesn't typically do a good job of measuring improvement, I don't think.
But it's also, I think, like, why I keep focusing on the K through 2, as a cultural beginning. I did some substitute teaching years ago, and I don't know why, I was always in first and second grade, because there's a lot of IEPs, I think, in first and second grade. But, Michael, you talked about a bilingual program, and I thought, imagine you walk into a class where you're struggling with the language, but 2 days a week it's in your language, and you feel smarter than the kid next to you who doesn't know your language. How does that change your psyche? Now, I know doing a bilingual program, I mean, it's like, how many teachers do we have? How do you take it from kindergarten to first grade? It's a nightmare to even think about, so it would take a lot of resources to.
Doesn't have to happen overnight, though,
But,
does it?
so, I mean, I think about being in a classroom where the students go, oh, he can't read, or he doesn't understand you, or the kids automatically tell the substitute teacher, right? So what is that doing to their daily, when they sit down, no, I know this student, I was here, 6 months ago, that, she can read, we just give her a little time. Or, even saying to some kids, I wish I spoke 2 languages. I'm so amazed that you speak 2 languages. And you see them go like, what? Like, oh, I do have something. I might not read as well as that person, but I can speak 2 languages. Or, so that culture of setting a metric that helps kids sort of see their, they might not have the, like in sports, so, maybe you can't shoot, but you're great on defense, or something, you know, that if.
Have you watched Ella play basketball?
No, but, you know,
She's the greatest
I know I'm
rebounder
great on
ever.
defense, I can't make a shot.
It's funny that you say this. I was talking to Jim Bailey today and going over some stuff, and he said, gosh, wouldn't it be great if there was a school system where instead of starting out with an A, and every time you miss something, you just slowly go down. What if you started out at 0, and every time you did something, they went, look at what you just learned. Oh my gosh, we're bumping you up. And what a different concept that would be to build up that way, to have that and always, that's what you're saying, is giving a different perspective to the exact same thing, but a different perspective.
When my kids were young, we were in LA for a while, and they went to a Montessori school, and that was really a revelation, because that school, at least, maybe they all are, but it's not a matter of getting a grade, it's you do this till you learn it. And then once you learn it, you learn the next thing. But I was thinking about the language, you know, if you do Chinese, then everybody's
On equal footing. Okay.
And I have, you know, nephews that are in Chinese immersion. And not that we could take that on here, but, you know, there are just different ways of looking at things that maybe it makes a difference. I don't know how we implement it here. And I don't know what it means about our board. I think that there are, you know, I wonder if, and not to change the subject, but I wonder if today's the day to talk about the things we can do better, and then put some of these idea-picking concepts later, like, or we create a framework to pick ideas, and then we find a way to pick ideas. When we first worked together as a board, we kind of took not an official vote, but you know, just kind of, what's your sense on the importance of a bunch of things? And then we didn't waste our time on the things that we didn't collectively feel were important. We focused more on the things that we thought were important. And you know, I think that's a good approach. Maybe, you know, we have that parking lot. Is it a parking lot or a swimming pool or whatever? But you know, maybe we add to that, and then we go through it as a board and say, you know, does everybody feel like this is important? And if not, then why leave things there? Why not just focus on the things we all think are important, and then we're all working on it?
Or pick 2 or 3 off that list for this year.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't do them all, that's why they're on that list.
Right.
Um,
And put the rest of the list in a drawer, and we pull it out in another year, and I don't know. You know, on this thing about advocating, I think I looked more at the state and federal levels. I didn't see the local that much. But I feel really bad, because the CSBA used to have one day of the year for local advocacy. So I would go and meet with our Congress people and assembly people and everybody here in our area. They would either be in the office here, or their staff would be, and then they moved that all to Sacramento, which makes it hard for everybody to do. But I thought that was really effective. I mean, it didn't help Ojai, because when I would go to those meetings, we'd sit around, and you know, Ventura was there and Oxnard were there, and the things we cared about, they opposed. And so, well, we found out that it wasn't going to go anywhere, so why waste our time? You know, maybe there's an opportunity to do a little bit more of that kind of advocacy.
You know, Julia Brownlee was a school board member.
Mhm.
That's where she started.
We've done nothing as a board to reach out to the politicians, have we, in terms of having actual conversations?
I used to, but nothing lately.
I mean,
Not as a board,
as
only
a
as an
board, yeah, I mean, to
individual.
like,
I don't know about you guys, but Steve Bennett took me out to a steak dinner.
you should put that on your
So
course.
there you go. I knew. Job done.
I knew how by the book Steve was when I think many of us met him for coffee or something after the election when we were elected, and it's like, hey, can I get you something? Absolutely not. I will get anything that I need. I will buy myself, not to be purchased. Yeah, I mean, I kind of see tonight, and actually, I'll tell you, if I decide to be on the board again, I feel this is a scary concept, but I feel I might be inclined to be a little bolder going forward. I feel like the one thing that I feel like I need to resist as a board member is the idea that this is just kind of how it is. And it's funny, this is a cliche, but you look at people like an Elon Musk. I mean, just think about the scale of this guy's ambition and just saying, I am going to have a company that's going to drill holes under the ground and make tunnels. And he's got it. And I'm going to have a company that's going to send rockets into space, and I'm going to get people to invest, and I'm going to do it better than and he's done it. I mean, we should be a little visionary, right? I mean, we should take some things and not, I'd love to leave a job like this and say, wow, I really changed something big. And I don't think as a board we should stay away from it. But I think we should work together as a board. And overall, I feel like this is impressive to me because it feels like we all feel like we work together well as a board. And there is that one, I did see that one seems maybe it was interpersonal because it said that we follow, and I wasn't really sure what the question meant, that the board follows like the agreement about how we deal with each other or something like that?
Yeah, number 14.
14. I didn't really know what it meant when I answered that.
The question is for those at home, board members follow agreements on how they will act towards each other. I guess there's no formal agreement.
I didn't sign one.
Yeah, I don't know what that would mean other, I guess I got the impression that, that there's maybe a sense of being hung out to dry or somehow not, I don't know.
I don't know, I mean, we have our board values, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I looked at it, like, do we treat each other according to our values? And, because we don't actually have like an agreement.
Right.
But, yeah, I mean, I was surprised at the variance on that, other than maybe a confusion over the question.
I think a lot of boards do have very formal agreements about how they're going to interact. Before we were all together.
Member Whipple?
There you go. But before we were all together, there were very specific rules about, we're gonna, whenever we discuss something, we're gonna go from either right to left or left to right, and we're gonna go up and down, and we're gonna, do this and that. Which, if people are comfortable with, that's fine. I like a more informal.
And I think I was I don't know which one of those ones I was, but I think I was, if you were one of those ones, I think I was the other one, and it was about an agreement. I'm like, we don't have an agreement. I guess there's just
Okay, good.
a general agreement that we're nice
Good.
to each other.
Yeah, and I think,
Well, I went to one of those CSBA, CB, whatever.
CSBA.
And they said, if you're always voting together, you're not a great board.
And I've heard
Like,
that.
you need to challenge each other a little bit more. You need to reach for things that are a little bit uncomfortable so that there's a little movement. Now, I don't know that we have a lot of opportunity. When you look at, the 7-Eleven committee, the sixth grade, we had some divergence on those more difficult decisions. But,
yeah, just lately, I mean, just
I
in the last
generally
couple
try
months
to
we
do
had-
my part there. Feel a
the
responsibility.
odd man out.
But we do have robust conversations, and a lot of boards don't do that. They talk past each other and then they just vote. And I know that there have been multiple occasions where through the course of the conversation, my view has evolved because you all have really valuable stuff to say. And so I learned from you, especially you guys who are parents and who are deeply involved in the details of the school. I don't have the benefit of that. So the discussion itself is really valuable for me. And I like our free-form stuff. I think everybody's very respectful of everybody else. It feels like a real conversation, like we're actually talking to each other, not mouthing postures and positions. I like that.
Actually, something comes up, I will say, that I know that it's an interesting thing that we do where someone becomes the president, and then there is that, you know, the power of at least running the meeting. And I know that that's just kind of a grammatical thing I do, my tendency is to perhaps allow too much interaction. I was uncomfortable a few times in those more heated meetings where I felt like I had given license for a kind of free-for-all that was not fair to the rest of the board. But I never felt like it, you know, it never coalesced into something, you know, I was afraid it was gonna, but it didn't, you know, but there is that fear that you kind of get, okay, fine, and then next thing you know, people are just chiming in from the audience, and then it's like all hell's broken loose. But I should acknowledge it because it's a fact. It goes with the being the president. But at the same time, I also feel like what goes with being the president, at least the way we interact, is if one of you were to say, "I'm putting my foot down," that you can do that,
Right.
and that certainly, you know, within reason, any board member has the right to insist on a more formal approach. I think that that's the direction it goes.
And I can see times and conversations where I think that's gonna be important as we hold open forums about what happens to this property. I think there's gonna be a time and a place for very open forums and hearing a lot of conversation and taking it all in from the public, and then there's gonna be times where that has to be done, and then it will be time for us to talk. So I can see, but in general, I think it's been fine.
Well, and I thought even like a way, and you know, we could deal with it would be, you know, and you're right, we're probably going to have more fraught meetings in the future. Like if it got to some point that a board member could say, I would like to move that we,
Close the public hearing.
or get more formal,
Right.
and have people speak only from the podium, and then, you know, I mean, and that's, I think, an appropriate way to deal with it, because then the board can decide it, and not just the person whose turn happens to be being president.
Although I have to though.
No, go ahead.
I like the openness. I really do. I mean, I think, I also agree with you that on a couple of meetings where, you know, people were arguing with the board.
Yeah.
and Stuff was like, okay. well,
I had no problem with Andy being contradicted, but when it was us.
I mean, he's fair game, but the rest of us, no, I like that. I like the byplay. I think it kind of goes along with our transparency and our soliciting of public opinion, not just being here and waiting for it to come to us. It does make for a little bit longer meetings sometimes. And, you know, we can control that, but I until it gets abusive, I like the spontaneity. I think we get a lot of good information that way. So I would not be critical of that.
Well, I know, but I just think the point I wanted to make, who happens to be in this position right now, is that I don't want it to be completely, I mean, I have my preference, but I don't want there to be a perception that my preference rules the day.
Mm-hmm.
I just want it to be clear that if a board member feels in a meeting like something is out of control, I have no problem with that board member saying, Kevin, with all due respect, I would like, and then the board can all address it. So, and that's what I would prefer, because otherwise, I might think, these people are hating me right now, but this is, what I'm going to do.
Well, and I'm going to disagree with you. I worry that as you start down that path, you
That's
become
true, yeah.
city council meetings, which are way too long, way too many people talking. They don't stick to the, and it's one thing to have the 3 minutes, occasionally go over it a little bit, but to just let people, back and forth, I don't think it runs the best meeting. I don't think it gives us the better information because people are just spouting versus thinking, and people aren't listening as well. I certainly, we run it different, but I think they're both good meetings. I mean, I haven't sat through meetings where I feel like, how many, like, it's Linda, Thane, you were our first year, and then Linda. I've enjoyed all the presidents that have gone through, but, I appreciate, that we'll have to say something, and the board will have to.
Yeah, I'll just to go back again to my feeling has always been, particularly on really fraught subjects where people are really emotionally invested, that shutting somebody down, like not shutting them down, if you can at all avoid not shutting people down, then it's just the better call, because I feel like at least people feel like they're being heard. And I know where you're coming from, but it's hard to explain to somebody in the moment. The reason I'm shutting you down is not because I don't want to hear everything you have to say. It's because I'm trying to run a better meeting, and all these other people are entitled to hear multiple, which is all true. But if you can, that's why, there have been times when I've just been like, oh, this is just so on the line of, I feel uncomfortable. This is horribly long. This person is really showboating. They're taking all the oxygen out of the room, but I don't want to shut them down. But, I've had some interaction with some of you individually, and I've taken the note, but I also want to say I still may have my tolerance may be more than yours, and I have no problem. I don't feel in any way like my authority is being usurped if someone goes, hey, I want to address the board, can we all decide, and I'd be fine.
Well, I guess my concern at that point is then you are seen as shutting people down. Whereas if you don't allow it in the first place, like, this is just the rules, we're following it, we're allowing, if we're, and I'm not saying if people can't speak a second time, or I just think it's easier to expand than to try to get the cat back in the bag.
And that's what I did the second meeting, but it turned out not to be nearly as intense a meeting. But as you remember, in the second meeting, I did start it off with kind of a preamble saying, we kind of let it go a little more than we really feel like we want to be able to hear from everybody. So let's really try to maintain the 3 minutes. And actually, the person with the hardest job is Kath, because she's like,
Well, we could change the rules. We could have a 3-minute rule, and then we could have a 1-minute follow-up later in the meeting. We can do whatever we want to do.
Well, this would be the time to talk about it. I'm definitely with Michael that I feel like, it's like the old Potter Stewart Supreme Court decision that pornography, you know it when you see it. I hate to have a rule. I think we can certainly say at the top, we like you to go 3 minutes, but it just still feels like, there's so much that goes into it. A person who's got a real commitment to the community and maybe is speaking on a subject, and you're just not going to shut them down. You're just not going to.
I'm right in the middle on this, because I really enjoy and appreciate input from the community, and especially, Angie and Chuck, and especially. But I also feel like once it gets to chaos, it's really hard to get out of chaos.
But there's a middle ground, right? There's a middle ground. I'm not in favor of people shouting stuff and saying, no, you're wrong, no, you don't have the information, that kind of thing.
Although we've had it.
Yeah, we had that, and use the context, right? If that happened at every meeting, it would be a problem. But it's not too much to ask for someone to come up here, and speak from the podium and not shout and be orderly. I think we can still be open to people. If you want to give them an extra minute because they're making a particularly compelling statement, I've seen that happen. I'm not married to, the spontaneous shouting. That part wasn't like the fun part.
Well, to be clear, this is a good opportunity for us. So this is worth having, I think, in deciding. I would like the president to continue to basically have the authority to make the call in the moment. But with the idea that any board member could choose to formally ask to do something different. On the other hand, we could as a board say, look, we don't want that, and we want our president to be pretty strictly enforcing a 3-minute rule. That would be a shame to me, because I just think that 3 minutes,
Then you might not run again?
I might not run, that would probably be it. I mean, it would be the straw. No, I just
But I
feel,
think that-
I feel like we're each different, and it also adds that element too.
The 3 minutes, to me, isn't the issue. But having the audience be so much a part of the conversation changes the dynamic. Whereas if you ask somebody just to stand at the podium to say what they wanted to say, it gives them the opportunity, but they'll think harder about whether they really want to say it. From their seat, it's really easy to say it, but if you ask them to stand up and be more official, then it requires a little more effort.
To be sure, but imagine all the times we've been here and it's been 9:30 and we've been talking about some subject and Angie's like, can I say something? And we're like, yeah, of course.
And
So I hate to be like, I'm sorry, get off your butt, get up here, you know?
well, and in those situations, of course, that
Yeah.
makes total sense.
But you know, I'm kind of with Shelley, because it's not only a, I mean, I'm not big on decorum anyway, but there is the point of recording it for the video and other things where having the mic is important.
And I think it's only really an issue in those heated discussions. And if we start off those more difficult discussions by saying, if you want to speak, you do it at the podium. The things where we're going over policy and we have a question for Angie, I don't think that's really an issue. Just,
Okay.
I think it's
Do we all
all-
agree that people should speak at the podium when it's a subject that's not just a clarification of some little thing, but we want them
I
to
think context is everything, right? So if we're having a meeting and Chuck and Angie are the only 2 people out there,
right.
I don't have any rules, right? Because they have valuable stuff. They know when they're a part of the conversation and when they're not. I think you're absolutely correct. There is a blurring of the line of, in some of these meetings, it kind of did where we focus back to talk to each other, and then there's still things coming out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember,
So-
like when we were talking about Summit, there were some situations where people were just saying stuff and.
Right.
But again, I
That's
still,
the
people
edges.
afterwards felt like we, at least told me that they felt like they were heard, and, it was hard, but.
Yeah, I just don't think asking someone to get up here, do it in the mic so everybody hears you. And,
Yeah.
please, nobody else talk, it's only polite.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think that's too much to ask.
fair enough.
But I think it's context sensitive in terms of, the meeting itself.
On a slightly related topic, I think there've been a couple of instances recently where we could have come to more of a consensus on topics, and we didn't. And I think part of that was, we did have some disagreements. But a big part of it, I think, is we didn't get to those topics until it was very late. And we were all tired and wanted to go home. And, so I think, we know what topics there's gonna be disagreement on. I don't think it would, in retrospect, I don't think it would hurt to move those to the front of the meeting rather than the end of the meeting. So,
I think that's a good idea. I think we've kind of done that a little bit. We should probably, I think Andy, if we all agree, you could certainly, we miss it in our agenda prep, because we could of course decide it then, but we have that, there's that template, right? So that if the subject that's gonna be interesting to the community happens to be under whatever it is that typically is a later, we just often, we'll often move it up, but sometimes we won't. But we should probably, just as a matter of course, try and put in order of what we think engagement will be. Because for the life of me, I've never felt like, other than like the consent calendar, if we talked about the budget up front, and then had two more things, and then had another finance thing, my brain wouldn't have any dissonance whatsoever. I mean, I don't find that I need to be going into the categories. It just, my brain's not thinking in those terms, unless you guys disagree.
And to kind of pile on to that, I think that there are some things that we spend a lot of time on, like the LCAP or whatever, where everybody's just going through the motions. And if there is something that somebody has that's important to say, I absolutely want to hear it. But if we're just doing it to say it, I don't need to hear it. I mean, that's just my feeling.
Well, I got the email when you said, "Shut up, Kevin," about the DML.
You know,
And I
I think we
Calling
are
some
more
words.
recently repeating ourselves.
Yeah.
We used to just say, I agree with Michael, you know, but now we're repeating ourselves, so it's
Yeah,
just.
right.
a-
Election's getting closer. Well, no,
Kevin,
but
could
but I was gonna also, go ahead.
I was just gonna, the only recommendation is, you turn to me when you ask, are there any modifications to the agenda? At city council, I think it's typically Johnny, and granted, it's primarily when it comes to consent calendar, but might be other areas where he's actually asking the entire council, do we want to reorder anything here? That could be actually a really easy thing, even in that moment, that evening, if once everyone's had a chance to see the agenda, you can
Right.
say, does anyone have any requested changes, or,
That's
and someone
great,
could
yeah.
say, actually, I'd really like to see this item up sooner.
And we may find 5 people that we didn't think were gonna show up who all
Right,
wanna speak on
exactly.
something and go like,
Yep.
absolutely,
Yep.
that's great.
and we've moved those things up in the past too, but I think sometimes we leave
Yeah.
things to the end because we know we're gonna have to spend a lot of time talking about it. But those are the things we don't wanna talk about when we're tired.
That makes sense.
Yeah, we should definitely try not to repeat the same, and I'll tell you, I feel like the same way about the LCAP. I have to say, part of it, I think, is, for lack of a better word, a necessary
Duty.
optic, right? Like the community, like, here's the LCAP, and we have to, but we've said similar things about it, although, we're not that familiar with it. This is like essentially the second time, I guess. Maybe third.
But she's saying it's changed every time, the format.
And there are interesting things that are brought out every time. It's just, there's a lot of, I don't want to pick on the LCAP because there are other things too, but I just feel like, I think it's, as you're prepping people to talk, I may be the only one that feels this way, but, if they feel it's really important, I want to hear it, but I don't want anybody to feel like they need to put together a presentation, and make a great presentation unless there's a lot of content.
So there's
I
a
don't know
couple-
how to say that. I don't want to offend anybody, and I want them to say what they want to say.
Well, I will say, we haven't talked about this much, but this is more of a Cheryl, Andy thing. You could, I wouldn't mind, it feels like lately we've had some situations where we've gotten the written materials, and some of the written materials include a PowerPoint, and then someone gives us a full-blown PowerPoint, the same PowerPoint that we've already been given, I've already read. So whenever possible, I think, now I know part of this is for the community, which is fine, but I still think that whenever possible, the person giving the presentation should make an abbreviated presentation of the PowerPoint. Because PowerPoints, they kind of lose their punch after 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So if we can, it's like you've got all the materials, these are the ones I want to highlight, it would be great. And I think, because I also think this is such an interactive board, that we often have much more interesting questions, and the person giving the presentation is going to be much happier to stand on their feet and answer questions than to have to go through their PowerPoint.
Yeah, you say all this and I hear 2 words, executive summary, right? And actually our finances are trending in that direction very nicely. And I think LCAP is another candidate for that, right? There's a gazillion pages of just big print. So it can't all be the highlight of the thing, right? So it's like, you know, what am I supposed to get from this? You
Mhm.
tell me, right? Because you know it intimately.
Mhm.
I think there are more opportunities for that.
Sure.
Um,
Absolutely.
And that kind of, because you give me too much detail and I get lost. And so I don't.
Yeah, some of us are old.
Yeah, I don't go through the check register.
I was thought I was
Gives me a
gonna
headache.
change the topic a little bit. There's I keep going back to the measurable indicators, and there's a couple of things that I should have asked, but I haven't, and I'm wondering about, and as measurable indicators. One of which is how many of our students are coming out of Matilaha having taken Spanish and able to go into Spanish too. Like, is that an effective program at Matilaha? Are we doing what we need to be doing there so that they're ready? Or are we losing kids who aren't going in? Like, that would be a measurable indicator. And I'm trying to think of other ones, like the math. Are we at Matilaha, are we Math 1 kids coming out able to go into Math 2, or are they going back into Math 1 again? But I would like to see other measurable indicators like that we don't often check on, that I would have to go and ask about.
Yeah, I would add to that, that it would be, I think it would be productive for the administration to try and identify similar ones, because one easy one, I don't think we get typically the AP scores. I mean, that's an easy one. So we're teaching an AP class, what percentage of our students are passing when they take the AP test? And, you know,
My understanding of that is that there is a little of encouragement when the AP size is low of some kids to push them in, but maybe they don't take the test, do they?
We have a pretty high
to.
participation rate
They're-
with tests.
They're not required
Yeah.
to, but most of them do. don't
Yeah,
they?
I think most of them do. But we get all the results, so it'd be easy to.
Because there might be a caveat there of, you know, if you really thought you were gonna take just regular and they said, you know, we really think you should try the AP, and they're not doing well on the AP exam, it's not necessarily indicative of the class, it's indicative of the student, but.
Well, at the very least, it's gonna bring, we'll learn more about what's going on with our AP classes.
And then
I mean,
maybe ask
And
better
could you say that
questions.
about almost all the measures, right? It's really based on the student.
Right.
I mean, you can measure almost anything, and if you get a student who is challenged in one particular year or one particular class, then you're gonna have that variability, right? I mean, we would understand that as a board, I think.
Well, that also and I'm looking at the clock, so we should probably figure out what's that one thing we want to get out of this. But I remember when my kids were younger, looking at some of those scores, those numbers, 36 or 48, and I found out like 2 years later, that also includes the special ed population. Like, they're required to take that. I think it's important that parents know that too. That it's sort of like, oh well. And now I'm just like my recollection might be wrong, but I don't believe there's a special ed classroom at San Antonio. So if you don't have special ed students taking the test, and at Topa and Miners Oaks, or Mermani, you're going to have different effects based on the population. And I think even like the Summit parents were saying, we have the largest percentage of second language, not the biggest number, but 80% of our students are second language learners, and those that information, it's not just here's a number, the number reflects something, right? So,
I'm a big fan of having more and useful metrics. I've been talking about it for a long time and failed to come up with anything. So, I'm all for us figuring something out.
And along the lines of the big picture, like drivers or what things we really want to tackle, I'm still going back to, we are 5 people in this district of a lot more than that, and not necessarily the pedagogical experts here. So I would be curious your response about putting together the list of what things that we think need to be tackled, but then inviting the teachers to come and say, hey, talk to us about this list that we put together. Do you agree with this? Do you see something else that we're missing that we really should be focusing on? Where do you want our support? I would love to hear from teachers? Is it teacher morale? Is that really what we should be focusing on? Or is it discord, you know, diversity and or is it special ed?
I would even say at each locate, like not just the teachers, but the parent, we could do that, you know, like two board members go and have, they're gonna be at Topa Topa, and the different board members are gonna be at Myers Oaks, the different ones are gonna be at, you know, Matilah, and just, you know, if parents wanna come, if teachers wanna come, or maybe teachers first and parents afterwards or something, that sort of, Kevin, you had that idea of holding our board meetings at a different
Circuit court.
spot.
I still like that idea.
You know, maybe it's
I know it's-
because we don't have to do the recording and all that, but if you just say, you know, these two board members and these two board members and these two, you know, we're gonna be at these locations.
And it would
So
be a good
Andy-
time to
Andy-
ask parents if,
Before open
if
house?
we did hold it over there, would they be more inclined to come before we, you know, really do that?
I love the idea of getting consensus and going out to places, but I think it would be really confusing for the community. I mean, we would know because Kathy would tell us where to go, but I think the community as a whole would say, you know, where am I supposed to be? And nobody remembers.
You mean for each board meeting?
For each
I
board.
agree, yeah.
But going out there, I think is, and getting consensus, I'm all for. But I wouldn't devalue our opinions, because for whatever wacky reasons, people elected us to be here, and
I agree, but I also think if we want that buy-in, if we want, you know, to really, they need to hear our reasoning why we chose these things, and I would really like to hear theirs as to why we're way off base or totally on target. It doesn't necessarily have to change what we decide, but I think the input is valuable.
The active listening itself is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Before we go though, if it's okay, I wonder if we could talk about 10 and 11, because the results were a little surprising to me about,
Yeah, and I wanted to be clear, this was the one I was talking about where I said, I don't think it's necessarily, I mean, we know that the board can only give direction at the board meetings.
Right.
I took this to mean that the board members don't talk to the, I don't know, I personally didn't think that this was necessarily a good thing. I think that the board should be engaging with the superintendent, not necessarily just at board meetings. And that's how I took
I
it.
totally agree, but I keyed in on the words direct, right?
Yeah.
Because he reports to the board, not to any one of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So was it people's understanding that this was just like talking to Andy? Because I don't see that as a problem.
I think I'm one of the lower scores, and it had more to do with my being the newbie and unsure of how things work entirely. And what came to my mind was the couple of times that, not necessarily that I sought Andy out and said, I need you to do this, but more vice versa, where he calls and says, here's the situation, what's your opinion on how we go about that? And I'm kind of in the dark, not knowing who else he's talked to or what their opinions are or anything else. I'm just
Right.
giving my opinion. And so that's kind of how I took that question is yeah, we kind of do that. Because we're not gonna meet again, and so that happens.
I did, I'm the other one, I put less often, but I don't think that's a bad thing,
Me too.
yeah.
I don't know if
So-
I was the other less often or maybe the off, but I felt the same way. I felt like, frankly, on this one, the further you, I mean, I think direct is a bad word,
Yeah.
because I wouldn't, yeah, of course, but Andy knows that none of us can direct him. But but in terms of engaging him, talking about important subjects, absolutely.
Especially because there are
Yeah.
things that are not appropriate for a public situation. You know, if I had heard something about, you know, a student or whatever, I wouldn't want to discuss it here. But yeah, directing him, no, and I think Andy has been good about that. That's what the parking lot is about.
Right.
I've had a board member approach me about this. Did the other board members want
Right.
to talk about this?
And I think
And it
if we're
was-
following the Brown Act, which I think we all do, we don't know the answer to these questions. And so I think Andy's.
We're right, yeah, we don't know what each other are.
Yeah,
doing.
so I think
Well, I'm
Andy's the one who should answer these questions.
Well,
Does he feel
and
like he's directed?
I think I didn't give direction as much credence as the rest of you. I give opinion, not direction. Right.
And I don't have a problem with it.
So-
I mean, I think that's what we're here for.
Right,
And that and voting.
so I didn't.
But on number 11, we probably do a little too much, I personally do a little too much of that. So I know, when Hank was here and Andy was here, and they would say, so what do you want, what do you want me to do with that? And I'd go, oh yeah.
Just
you
think
know.
about it.
So, I assume other people are doing that too. You just have this great idea, let's do it.
What do you want me to do? Realize I'm right.
But on the other hand of this, I think Andy has reached out on occasion for input. I think that's totally appropriate. I think it's totally appropriate for us to give input freely.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think the word direct is the key word here that we should.
And as a final follow-up, do we feel like we should be doing more advocacy at the local level?
Like I said, I wouldn't mind us adding to our kind of the formal things that we think about at each board meeting, whether there are opportunities for us to do that.
And
And I think we'd have to be careful that they are related to education and affecting the
Right.
schools.
I'm more reluctant, I think I'm more reluctant than anyone here to be a political agent as a board. If it's something that actually has something to do with the district, absolutely. I mean, I think I advocated fairly strongly for, what I thought was right in terms of this property. But, in terms of, nukes or whatever,
We're in a free city.
I don't.
We are.
Well, and I think
I'm not
that's-
opposed to being a nuke-free city, for the record. But I really don't see that as our goal.
Right, we
No,
don't
I
wanna get
didn't
into
see-
the plastic bag.
I
thing,
didn't
those
think,
kinds of-
I didn't see this like that. I saw this more along the lines of periodically learning that there's gonna be a lobbying day for public schools in Sacramento or other similar things about the public school mission. I know you went, right, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago or something, you
Oh,
went to
I've gone to,
Sacramento?
I didn't
Yeah.
go to Sacramento,
Somebody
but
went to Sacramento, I thought, from the board.
I always went to the local ones.
Shelley and Michael did, you did. Oh, not Sacramento, you went to
San Francisco, and so that was gonna be my other.
But that was a CSBA
That
thing.
was a,
I did
yeah,
that
that
too
was
when
not
we
an
first-
advocacy
yeah.
thing, it was a,
But that's all I thought it meant that, like, hey, there's, they're looking for school board people to show up and talk about the importance of whatever,
School funding.
But I don't think it hurts us at all. I mean, this is where I would feel the opposite way. I don't think it would hurt at all for us to go to an assembly member or a Congress and tell them they ought to give us more money.
Yeah, and I'm not even so much talking about, ad hoc, like, let's go out and buttonhole, Congress people. I'm really talking about, I don't think make much effort to kind of identify areas where where other school districts are getting involved in.
More structured approach.
Yeah, but I know there just probably hasn't been a lot of that in reality, and then,
Well, and our focus is,
Yeah.
if you told me you wanna focus on that or to school morale and pedagogy and
yeah.
I think we have more important things to do here probably. And
Well,
does it make a difference?
and I kind of look at it a little bit differently, not so political, but with our local clubs and groups in Ojai, are we actively engaging them? I think that's an important, and along those lines, I think I mentioned before, but I have been asked to speak to Rotary in August, and so I will be going to the next Rotary meeting to talk about the state of the schools. No idea what I'm gonna say at this point, so if you guys have input or things that you want brought up to Rotary, let me know. And I'm only speaking as myself, not for the board, but I think that those kinds of things, engaging our local community is important.
I think that's great.
Well, obviously, we can have further conversation at any board meeting, so would you like to just put a little, this continued discussion on our next board meeting, and then maybe with the idea of talking about ideas for establishing year-long or longer district goals?
Goals, a structured kind of involvement.
Yeah.
Because an annual day, I mean, once a year to talk to our legislators, touch base with them, I think is appropriate. I do, and I hate that you said that, because I'm getting pushed at work to do the same thing. Is to get out to the rotaries and the chambers and all that other kind of stuff. They're telling all the senior execs, get out there, get in the community. So,
You do a very good job of publicizing job openings, I must say.
hey, you know, I'm trying. We need people.
Everyone had enough of this tonight?
Well, I agree, so we're walking away saying that what we come back to, I mean, we can sort of release this except for, I mean, you know, it stays for next year to look back on or whatever, but we're hoping to set some goals. We're hoping to find new metrics that maybe help us understand the schools more.
So should we all come back to the next meeting with
Yeah.
things in mind that we're goals?
The
and
metrics might be
metrics?
harder, but the goals for sure we can do.
In 2 weeks or the one after that?
What do you say? Is the next one pretty
August 17th?
pretty booked up? 14th, isn't it?
14th. I don't think it's too booked up.
Let's do it on the 14th then.
And we can always just add those things to the parking lot, right, and vote about what we think about the parking lot.
Yeah, but I think this is maybe a little different than some of the stuff on the parking lot, which is a little more discreet and more specific. But I don't really remember everything on the parking lot. Michael, I don't want to, or Thane, is this one of those situations where this is premature?
It's not premature for me.
Is there a motion?
Are we?
Move to
Meeting is ended.
adjourn.